Take a shot of water every time I say soap loaf. Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm the creator of Artistic Antics LLC, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about the difference between melt and pour soap and cold process soap. There are lots of variables to consider when deciding what type of soap making method you want to use. We're going to break it down into an SEO friendly list. We're going to talk about cost, time, danger, customization and design, and cleanup. So without further ado, let's get started. But before we jump into that, this video is sponsored by me. By me. If you don't know already, I have a shop, an Etsy shop, and my own website called Artistic Antics LLC, where I sell candles, wax melts, soaps, sugar scrubs, and more. So if you're interested, check it out. Links in the description. And now, back to the show. So the first variable we need to consider when deciding what type of soap making method you want to do is the cost of your materials. I'm not going to factor in the cost of your own labor because that can be dependent on your own personal preferences as well as your skill level. So for this, we're just going to be talking about the cost of making a very basic loaf of soap. A typical loaf of soap is 3 pounds, so we're going to be comparing melt and pour soap bases to making a very simple cold process soap loaf. This is also not going to include any fragrances, dyes, or any extra materials you want to use. This is just the base. So for making a melt and pour soap loaf, you're going to need 3 pounds of a melt and pour soap base. For the materials, we're going to be using the Brambleberry prices. Brambleberry is a soap and other craft website where you can buy lots of materials for your soap making or other kinds of goods. I'm just using this site because this is the site that I personally use when making my soap and other materials. You can buy your soap making supplies from lots of other websites, but this is what we're going to use for this example. Brambleberry's cheapest melt and pour soap base is their SFIC white melt and pour soap base, and this is $4.19 per pound. So for 3 pounds to make a full soap loaf, that will be $12.57 for a soap loaf. That's just making one soap loaf. Take a shot of water every time I say soap loaf. So to make a bar of unscented cold process soap, you're going to need lye and oil. For this example, we're going to be using Brambleberry's Simple and Gentle soap recipe. This calls for coconut oil, olive oil, and palm oil. So for your lye and all 3 oils, it's going to be about $26.96 based on the measurements that Brambleberry sells on their website. So for just making 1 bar of soap, it looks like melt and pour soap base is the cheaper option. However, your price per loaf is going to decrease if you buy in bulk. We're now going to compare the price of melt and pour soap versus cold process soap if you were to make 100 loaves of soap. To make 100 loaves of melt and pour soap, you're going to need 300 pounds of soap. Brambleberry does offer melt and pour soap in a bulk order of 40 pounds. So for 300 pounds of soap, that's going to be approximately $1,083 or $10.85 per loaf. Now for cold process soap, for the coconut oil, palm oil, olive oil, and lye that we need, buying in bulk, for 100 loaves of soap, that will be about $830.82 or approximately $8.31 per loaf. If you look at it, melt and pour soap is the cheaper option if you're looking to just make 1 soap loaf or a couple soap loaves, but if you're looking to make your soap in bulk, the more cost-effective option is going to be to make cold process soap. Now keep in mind, this does not include any customizations that you may want to do in your soap. If you add any fragrance oils, dyes, etc., it's going to increase the cost of your soap, and it'll increase the amount of time that goes into making your soap. Speaking of time, let's talk about the amount of time it takes to make a melt and pour soap loaf versus a cold process soap loaf. For this, we're going to be looking at the time of actually creating the soap. This is from getting the ingredients to actually pouring your soap and starting to let it set. And then we're going to look at the amount of time it takes for the soap loaf to set before you can cut it. and the amount of time it takes for the soap to cure. So for melt and pour soap and cold process soap, I used an example of a brambleberry recipe that included 3 layers. And the creation time of those soaps were about the same. It was about 2 hours. It was moot on that. But if you look at the amount of time it takes for melt and pour soap to set, it is drastically different than the amount of time it takes for cold process soap to set. Melt and pour soap can set in about 4 hours to up to overnight before you can cut it. Cold process soap, on the other hand, can take several days to set. Up to 3 days is recommended for a cold process soap to set before you can demold it. And then for curing time. Curing a soap is just making sure that all of the moisture is released from the soap, and it also helps for the saponification process to finish. It's very important that you let your soap cure completely before you use it or you sell it. Curing time for cold process soap, that can be between 4 to 6 weeks. Melt and pour soap, however, doesn't require curing at all because melt and pour soap has already gone through the saponification process. It is already created, essentially. And so once you create your melt and pour soap, you can cut it and use it that same day without any adverse effects. The third variable that we're going to look at is the danger involved in soap making. Now you may be asking yourself, danger? What danger could there be in making soap? Well, actually a lot. Soap is made from the combination of lye and oil, and lye can be very dangerous when not handled properly. Lye is a sodium hydroxide, which is also known as a caustic soda. It's an acid and a base that is counteracted by acids like vinegar or citrus juice. However, when lye is mixed with water, heat and dangerous fumes can be released. Lye can also have a very dangerous reaction when interacted with certain metals. It can actually explode. This is why it's so important to not only handle lye properly, but fully mix your lye in with your oils. Now you may be asking yourself, because lye is so dangerous to use, can you make soap without using lye? The simple answer is no, because soap inherently is a mixture of lye and oil that creates the saponification process that makes soap. However, there is a way that you can kind of go around using lye when soap making, and that is by using melt and pour soap bases. Melt and pour soap has already gone through the saponification process, and so there is no risk of lye burns or misusing lye because it's already been created. Melt and pour soap is definitely the safer option of the 2 types of soap making if you are afraid of working with lye. Are there any dangers with using melt and pour soap? Not really. The only danger you really have is the heat that is generated when you heat up the soap in either your microwave or double boiler. So by using melt and pour soap, you can sidestep the adverse effects that misusing lye can create and just make beautiful soap on its own. However, melt and pour soap does have some drawbacks because of the restrictions in not creating your soap from scratch. So that leads us into Number 4, design and customization. So this is the category where cold process soap really outshines melt and pour soap. Because cold process soap is soap that is completely made from scratch, you can affect what kind of oils you choose to make, what kind of butter you choose to incorporate into your soap. You can use fresh ingredients like milk or fruit, which you cannot use with melt and pour soap. It is 100% completely up to you and your own blend of oil and lye to create your own customized soap. Melt and pour soap bases, on the other hand, are already created, and the manufacturer, whoever has made the soap or whoever you're buying the soap from, has already decided what kind of combination of oil they are going to use to make the soap. So you can buy different types of melt and pour soap bases like aloe vera soap, shea butter soap, or glycerin soap, but adding any additional oil or butter to your soap bases is not really recommended with melt and pour soap because it can change the consistency of your soap base. This is not an issue with cold process soap because you're creating it completely from scratch. So if you're looking to make a 100% completely customized bar of soap, cold process soap is going to definitely be the way to do that. Cold process soap also has a lot of design techniques that are not possible or are much more challenging with melt and pour soap. For example, the swirl technique that you see a lot online, I'll put some pictures here, is very, very challenging with melt and pour soap and is so much easier to create using cold processed soap. Cold processed soap, you can change the consistency of your soap base. This is called trace. So when mixing your lye together with your oil, the longer you mix it, the thicker your consistency of soap will become, creating a thicker trace. Or if you don't mix it as much, it will create a thinner trace. This variance in consistency can help a lot when creating these larger swirls. Melt and pour soap, on the other hand, has one consistency. It's very thin. This can be good when creating soap embeds or when using molds, but it's not very good for creating those large swirls that you saw. There are some designs, however, that melt and pour soap is better at, and that is when layering. Because melt and pour soap is so thin, it is much easier to create very clean layers, whereas cold processed soap, because of the consistency and the way that you make the soap loaf, it can be very difficult to create very clean lines, and you often see very uneven layers instead of very straight layers. So depending on what type of designs you're looking to create with your soap can affect what type of soap making method you decide to use. Finally, the last variable we're going to look at is the amount of cleanup that it takes the amount of cleanup time it takes after you're done making your soap. For cold processed soap, again, because the saponification has not finished, it is much more dangerous to clean up after you have made your soap because of the lye and oil mixture. Therefore, it's very important to use gloves and use very hot water and a grease cutting soap when cleaning up after you make your soap. Also, because of this, it's very important that the utensils that you use when making your soap, you use for soap making only. Do not interchange what materials you use to make your soap and what materials you use to eat with. You do not want the ingredients in your soap to get in your food. It can be very dangerous and have negative health effects. To clean up after making cold processed soap, you want to scoop all of the extra soap from your containers into either a mold, the trash, or a different container and let that sit. Then you want to wipe off your containers with a paper towel and throw that paper towel in the trash. Another way you can clean up after making cold processed soap is the garbage bag method. So what you do with this is you just take a garbage bag, put all of your containers and utensils that you use to make your soap into the bag, tie it off, and wait for a couple of days, usually 72 hours. By this time, the soap will have solidified enough where you can use a spatula to get your soap out of the containers and throw it in the garbage. On the other hand, melt and pour soap is very easy to clean up afterwards, again because the saponification process has already been completed. It's already soap. To clean up after your melt and pour soap, all you have to do is run it under some hot water and it'll bubble up and just go down your sink. In my notes here, I put bada bing, bada boom after this section. I don't know if I thought I was a carnival barker or what happened with that. In conclusion, what is the best method for soap making? Who's to say? It's really based on personal preference. Either way, I hope you enjoyed learning about the pros and cons of each soap making process. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos about soap making, candle making, sugar scrubs, or whatever else I decide to post. If you're interested in my soaps or candles, please check out my Etsy or my Shopify store. I'll have them linked down below. You can get this Summer Love candle or my Summer Love soap at the link down below. Also, if you haven't already, please check out my TikTok and Instagram where I post more content on the daily. Thank you so much for watching me and my antics, and I hope this helped. Bye!